Gege Agutami kind of sucks at math. Don't take my word for it. Just look. He can barely count. He mixed up the numbers 5 and 50. So why is it then that the coolest power in Jujutsu Kaisen is so mathematical? If you haven't figured it out yet, I'm talking about Gojo's technique, Limitless. If you clicked on this video, I'm sure you're already familiar with it. But on the off chance you aren't, Limitless allows Gojo to distort and manipulate space. One use of this makes it literally impossible to reach him. But what does that actually mean? This can be interpreted with the story of Achilles and the tortoise. Imagine Achilles running towards a tortoise. This is one of Zeno's paradoxes, specifically the dichotomy paradox, Zeno being an ancient Greek philosopher. He argues that it is impossible for Achilles to reach the tortoise, and the reasoning behind it is tricky. Using the framing of the paradox, Achilles has to go halfway to the tortoise, then another half of that, then another half, and so on. In essence, he has to travel halfway between himself and the tortoise an infinite number of times, so he'll never reach the tortoise. That sounds insane. I mean, think about it. If that reasoning checked out, then nothing could ever reach anything or even move in the first place, which, to be fair, is exactly what Zeno argued. It is impossible since you can technically subdivide any distance into infinite parts. Now, believe it or not, what we're debating here is something that stumped mathematicians for over 2,000 years. The idea of doing an infinite number of tasks in a finite amount of time, like traveling half a distance infinitely many times. Now, these are paradoxes, but they're pretty impractical. Who cares if you tell me it is impossible? That's not going to stop me from punching you in the face or somewhere else. But believe it or not, this whole idea is literally the foundation of calculus. And Gojo's power is, quite literally, embedded in calculus, specifically within limits. Bear with me. First, we need to understand what a limit is. Say the total distance from Achilles to the tortoise is 1. We can think about the halving distance idea, the dichotomy paradox from earlier, as an infinite sum of progressively smaller distances, a half, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, and so on. All we're doing is plugging in values ranging from 1 up to some arbitrary number n, or I, and adding up all those terms. Now, what if we plug in infinity? Well, you can't plug in infinity in math because it isn't actually a number. But we have a workaround for that. Instead of actually plugging in infinity, we take the limit as n approaches infinity of the sum. We just want to see what value the sum approaches as n gets larger and larger, heading towards infinity. We're not actually plugging in infinity, it's just a clever workaround so we don't have to. You can try this yourself. Plug a really big number in for n on a calculator and you'll see the value it approaches is 1. What that means is, the total distance between Achilles and the tortoise approaches or converges to 1 as the number of halves tend to infinity. Thus, the limit of this infinite sum is 1. Now, here's what the Jujutsu Kaisen wiki states. Infinity is the convergence of an immeasurable series. Anything that approaches Gojo slows down and never reaches him. This is because the technique takes the finite amount of space between the two subjects and divides it an infinite number of times. In mathematics, no matter how many times someone divides a number, it will never reduce to 0. Limitless brings this concept to reality. Pay attention to the never reduce to 0 part. Here is where the concept of the infinite halves and limits that we discussed earlier comes in. Now, imagine the total distance as being the distance between someone and Gojo. See, technically, any subdivision within the series wouldn't actually reduce the remaining distance, the halves, down to 0 in the mathematical sense. But the limits suggest that the infinite series as a whole does converge, be it after an possibly infinite amount of mathematical subdivisions. This is where the distinction between the mathematical sense and reality comes in. In reality, movement is not being carried out as an infinite number of mathematical subdivisions, but simply as a real motion performed under the laws of physics and time. Which means the actual problem here is the mathematical interpretation of reality, specifically the subdivision interpretation, not actually reality being misaligned with math. This is what gives rise to the paradox, and also where calculus offers an explanation with limits. but in the world of fiction and sorcery.
領域展開無料空所
Logic like this can be toyed with. Now, to actually explain Gojo's technique, here's how you could interpret it instead. Let's visualize the infinite series as a graph, with the distance between Gojo and someone against the number of subdivisions. Essentially, as the number of subdivisions goes out toward infinity, the graph approaches the limit, in other words, Gojo, but mathematically never actually reaches it. Bingo! Gojo is literally the limit of this graph that you can never actually reach in the mathematical sense. In other words, Gojo is a walking asymptote.